Flight 982, a story of change. The luxurious first-class cabin of Flight 982 buzzed softly with the ambient hum of overhead lights and the gentle murmur of passengers settling in. Elena Parker, a seasoned flight attendant with over a decade of experience, adjusted her perfectly pressed uniform, her eyes instinctively scanning the rows for any irregularities. Her gaze halted on a well-dressed black family gracefully settling into their first-class seats. Something tugged at Elena, a flicker of doubt she couldn't quite suppress. The man, tall and composed in a tailored navy suit, helped his wife arrange their carry-ons while their young daughter hugged a bright yellow teddy bear. Without a second thought, Elena's feet moved before her mind caught up, carrying her purposefully down the aisle toward them. "Good afternoon," Elena greeted, her tone clipped yet polite. "May I see your boarding passes, please?" Thomas Whitaker, the patriarch of the family, didn't flinch. He had seen this before. With a calm that came from years of practice, he reached into his blazer and handed over 3 pristine tickets. His jaw tensed ever so slightly as Elena's eyes darted across the passes, hunting for some kind of error that didn't exist. His wife, Naomi, sensed it too. She gently squeezed their daughter Ava's small hand, her manicured fingers betraying a faint tremor. Ava, only 5 years old, looked up at her mother with curious, innocent eyes. Elena offered a tight-lipped smile. "One moment," she said, turning briskly and disappearing behind the velvet curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane. Thomas inhaled deeply, pulling out his phone and typing a short message with surgical precision. Naomi didn't need to ask whom he was texting. She knew. And what Elena didn't know was that Thomas Whitaker wasn't just another passenger. He was the largest shareholder in the airline. Moments later, Elena returned, her smile brittle, the lines of tension around her mouth deepening. "I'm sorry, but there's been a mix-up," she said, her voice carrying a forced authority. "I'll need you to move to the main cabin." An audible hush fell over the surrounding passengers. Heads turned. Whispered speculations buzzed in the air like static. "An issue?" Thomas asked, his voice calm but firm, the kind of voice used in boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. "We booked these seats weeks ago. Could you explain what the problem is?" Elena's throat dried. "It's just standard protocol. I'll need you to move." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the cabin. An older woman seated 2 rows ahead, her pearl necklace glinting in the cabin lights, leaned toward her companion. "I saw the board with priority. Those tickets are valid." Ava, sensing the tension despite her young age, tugged Naomi's sleeve. "Mommy, did we do something wrong?" Naomi's heart clenched. "No, sweetie," she whispered, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. Thomas stood, his height commanding attention, but his voice remained cool. "If there's truly an issue, feel free to involve security. I'd like their input too." Elena faltered. The weight of stairs, the creeping sense that she had made a grave misstep, pressed down on her. Still, she turned away, heading to notify security, missing the knowing glance Naomi and Thomas exchanged. By the time the Whitakers were seated in the cramped main cabin, Thomas had sent the message that would set off a chain of irreversible events. Within minutes, the cockpit received an urgent call from corporate headquarters. Back in first class, Elena adjusted silverware on meal trays with shaky hands when the captain's voice echoed through the intercom, calling her to the cockpit. Moments later, the truth unraveled. Thomas Whitaker wasn't just any passenger. He was a controlling stakeholder in the very airline she worked for. Elena's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the galley counter. Her colleague, Marcus, appeared beside her, his brows knitted with concern. "You know who that was, right?" he whispered. I didn't," she stammered. Marcus sighed. "You just profiled the wrong family." The realization hit Elena like a punch to the gut. Every moment of the interaction replayed in her mind, now heavy with the crushing awareness of her biases. It wasn't about the boarding passes. It never was. A formal request for her to deliver an in-person apology came swiftly. Each step toward the Whitakers in the economy section felt like walking through wet cement. She found Thomas and Naomi seated with Ava nestled between them, her teddy bear in her lap. "Mr. Whitaker," Elena began, voice barely steady, "I want to sincerely apologize for my earlier actions." Thomas met her gaze, steel behind his eyes. "This isn't about an apology," he replied. "It's about systemic change. What happened today happens far too often. The difference is most people don't have the resources I do to push back." His words echoed in the cabin, carrying the weight of hard truth. The fallout was immediate. News spread like wildfire. Hashtag airline accountability began trending within hours. Social media exploded with stories of similar injustices, people sharing their own moments of being judged before being heard. At the airline's glass-walled headquarters, CEO Margaret DeLuca faced the storm head-on. In an emergency board meeting, Thomas sat across from her, his demands clear: comprehensive bias training, third-party audits, and monthly progress reports. "This isn't about bad PR," Thomas asserted. "It's about real change. Every passenger deserves respect. Every single one." The executive team scrambled into action. Policies were overhauled. Bias training became mandatory. Corporate culture was dissected, rebuilt from the ground up. Elena, meanwhile, faced her own reckoning. Stripped of her position, she found herself alone in her apartment, replaying the moment that upended her life. But where she expected anger or denial, there was only a raw, aching realization. She had let her assumptions guide her. She enrolled in bias training, this time as a student, not an employee. Slowly, she began to unravel years of unconscious prejudice. Her journey became a case study in the airline's corporate workshops, a cautionary tale, but also one of growth. Months later, Thomas sat at home, reviewing the airline's progress reports. Discrimination complaints had plummeted. The culture was shifting. Ava played nearby, flying her teddy bear through imaginary clouds. "Daddy," Ava piped up, "remember that plane where the lady made us move?" Thomas smiled gently. "Ido. Did we help make it better?" He glanced at the report in his hands. Numbers up, complaints down, but more importantly, a shift in respect and dignity for all passengers. "We did, sweetheart. We really did." Elena's path of self-reflection led her to become an advocate for systemic change within the industry. She now spoke at workshops, sharing her mistakes openly, helping others confront their own biases before they made the same missteps. One family stand had become the catalyst for change in an entire industry. Because sometimes it only takes one moment of injustice to spark a revolution.